Hello, today is a bit of a terminology day because we're covering some, I don't know if they're daunting, but some interesting sort of terms such as SDK and CLI. So let's get straight into it. We're starting with some good old definitions such as what is an API? What a classic question. I love it. Let's have a look. So an API stands for an application programming interface, and it is really about how we communicate with other bits of software. A really good metaphor is actually like a server in a restaurant. So when you go into a restaurant and you order a meal, you order it through your waiter or your waitress. And they're going to then go to the kitchen, and then the kitchen's going to create the food and it's going to come back out to you. Now, you don't need to go right up to the kitchen. You don't need to talk to the chefs. You don't need to make the food yourself. You're just talking to the server, and then they're going to bring you your food when it's all done ready. This is the same as an API. You don't need to understand all the inner workings of what's going on in a program or an application to use the API. Same way that you don't need to know all of the ins and outs of what it takes to be a chef and to cook that meal, but you can still enjoy the meal and you can still enjoy the fruits of that application or that program and get what you need out of it through the API. A great example of APIs in the real world is a weather app. For a weather app, you don't need to go and understand how they're gathering all that information about predicting the weather. You just open your app and it's there. It's using an API to actually grab the data from wherever it's collecting all that weather information and then display it to you on your little app. Now, in AWS, every single thing that we ask AWS to do is actually going through an API. Whatever we're asking, whether it's storage, setting up a database, doing some provisioning, and provisioning is just a fancy word really for setting something up. You don't need to write that really complex code that AWS has already written for you. You're just getting the end result, right? You don't need to go and understand how relational databases have been created in AWS. You just need to understand how to use it once it comes to you. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can use APIs or send out those API calls to AWS to actually get back what we need. There's three of them mainly. We have the AWS Management Console, the AWS Command Line Interface, and AWS Software Development Kit. Now, the AWS Management Console does a whole bunch more than just call APIs. It also does a lot of infrastructure management. Now, infrastructure management is basically taking a bird's eye view of everything that you're doing in AWS, all of the computers that you have set up, all of the virtual servers, all of the storage, all of the accounts, all of the users, and it's just making sure that everything is running on track. That's called infrastructure management. So let's get into the first of these tools that helps with APIs, but also with infrastructure management, and that is the AWS Management Console. The AWS Management Console is browser-based, so you can use it anywhere that you can access the internet. And you can quickly search for any related services by name or acronym, or even just keywords. The console includes portals and workflows that can really simplify the process of completing tasks in AWS. You can have multiple identities or different users that are logged into the AWS console at the same time. It's really useful for beginners, and there's heaps that you can do with it. You can build and test out entire applications and environments. You can view your AWS bills, you can monitor reports, and you can even work with other non-technical resources. The great thing about it is it's all point and click, so it's very easy to use. Again, just great for beginners and learning. However, it can get a bit tiresome as you start to develop more things in AWS. You don't want to have to click through all of those same buttons and steps every single time you want to update something small. And so there's another option, and that option is infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is a great way to actually set up all of the things you need to set up in AWS, but instead of using the point and click console, you're just typing out the instructions in a script or as code. If you're a developer, this is going to be music to your ears because often it can feel very frustrating and slow having to go around and click everything when you can actually just type it out and program it yourself. There are two different tools that really help us with this, which is the AWS Command Line Interface and Software Development Kits. The AWS Command Line Interface lets us make API calls that are directly from the terminal. If you've never used a terminal before, it's this kind of programming box that comes up on your computer, and you can type out code in there and it's going to directly do whatever you tell it to do. It's very useful. It always looks pretty hackery because sometimes it's green script on a black background or white script on a black background. So it looks very cool. but it's nothing really to be afraid of. It's just another way of doing that point and click exercise, but it's a bit more direct because you're typing it out as code instead. Once you've typed it out as code, the beauty of this is that then you can save it and you can reuse that. So you're less likely to make errors because you can save and reuse the script over and over again. And you can have them run automatically or on a certain trigger when something else happens. You're basically just automating all of the infrastructure management and setup, which is very handy as your business or whatever project you're doing with AWS grows. Another way to interact with AWS is through software development kits. Now, software development kits or SDKs allow you to interact with AWS not through the terminal, but instead through a programming language. So maybe you're familiar with C++ or Java or .NET or anything else. Well, now you can communicate with AWS by using these languages. Just like using the command line interface, you're avoiding a lot of manual repetition, which can lead to mistakes. You can automate a lot of tasks and setup, which is really fantastic. You can reuse scripts that you've written. And AWS actually provides a lot of documentation on how you can set these up and get started with them. Interacting with AWS is really important, and today we've learned about 3 different ways that you can do it. We've learned that APIs are the key thing behind all of them, but you can either do it through the AWS Management Console, through the command line interface, which goes through your terminal, or through software development kits, which use programming languages. But usually you start at the first one and then you work your way down, but it's totally up to you. If you have experience with programming, why not jump ahead? If you don't have experience with programming, why not jump ahead anyway? You're going to learn a lot. Happy learning, and we'll see you in the next video.